Welcome back to Insight Club. Today we're talking about assumptions about how to create positive change. Stay tuned. The first rule of Insight Club is you don't talk about Insight Club. You do Insight Club. The second rule of Insight Club is the only assumptions we make about one another are that we all want happiness and we all want to avoid suffering. The third rule of Insight Club is you check all your other assumptions at the door. We hope these conversations will bring you insights that incite you to action. Welcome to Insight Club.
And you ask yourself, where is my mind? Where is my mind? Where is my mind?
So where is your mind today?
I was just thinking about it. This time, the thing that caught my attention in the introduction was the assumption of we all want happiness. And I was thinking, do we all want happiness? I heard just, I don't know, a few weeks ago, I guess, about this not being the main thing. That some people actually are attached to suffering and so on, and what we get is usually what we feel like we need or that we deserve. And maybe that is a little bit tied with this idea of the assumptions about how to create positive change, because if some of us are not actually more tied to happiness and actually they're more tied to either being right or the struggle, the suffering, and so on, maybe positive change might look different for each of us.
Yeah. And what if I've been hearing lately this like piece of wisdom from a famous author that's, the point of life isn't happiness. The point of life is to be useful. And there can be something very positive in that, right? Especially because happiness can be a tricky term. We may not all be using it the same. Like sometimes we conflate happiness and momentary ephemeral pleasure. Like I ate a bag of Cheetos last night for the first time in a really, really long time. And I was like, oh my God, I see why people eat these. Like the flavor, the way they have designed that flavor tells my brain, like, this is everything you need in life. Right. And I was like fascinated. I was like, this is some science right here. Somebody's got the perfect texture, flavor, everything combination. I'm like, I'm glad I don't buy these. I would just eat them. But we wouldn't want to think that's happiness because, and I'll make this distinction, that's not tied to my values. In fact, that actually opposes my values. Eating a bag of Cheetos and paying somebody to poison me opposes my values around food production, treatment of land and soil, all kinds of things, like what I put in my body, all kinds of things. So this feeling of, I think you've hit at a core, like a really important component of how we create positive change. Because first we have to even agree on what happiness means. And I think some people consider happiness to be frivolous. Oh, you're in pursuit of your own happiness. La, 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 nice for you. You must not care about anybody else. So it kind of invites us to zoom out and go, well, why do we think we're here? Like, what's the point of being here? And as you said, I mean, maybe some people think the point is to suffer. Some people might think the point is to make meaning through martyrdom, in which case positive change is also going to be hard to come by because it's like, it can't be easy.
Yeah.
It has to be a struggle.
Yeah. And it's such a prevalent idea that nothing that comes easy is good. Like you need to have the struggle to, even in when I think of storytelling, you need to have the crisis.
Yeah. I really appreciate, you turned me on to the Gene Keys several years ago, and I really appreciate Richard Rudd's subtle distinctions around strength on the one hand, which he paints as a positive force, and force on the other hand. And my gene key, like one of my primary ones, I think it's number 43, but it's the journey from force through to strength. And a big message in it is, don't try. At one point he quotes Yoda in the audio, and he's like, it's not about the try. Like the try energy is what brings us into struggle loops and suffering loops. But he also, points out things in nature like the seedling that does need to use strength, or you do need to use strength to like break through the shell of the seed, or the chicken needs strength to break through its shell. And in our human evolution, our spines, did this like straightening thing that was like a huge muscular kind of like the seed in the pod. So on the one hand, there is this strength, but that's different from I'm going to force my way through something that isn't meant to be, or that's resisting, or, just because I have to find the hardest way to do it, which I've definitely adopted as a pattern. I feel so called out in the most loving, best, beautiful way when he tells me like, you're not, try is the problem. It's not the doing. It's not the exertion, it's not that you should never move and engage your muscles, but the try and the force not working for you.
Yeah. It creates the tension, right? The friction that prevents the flow.
Yeah. And so, I mean, to go kind of further into like, what's that difference between force and strength? I think when we're in force and when we're in try, we are actually the ones bringing the resistance.
Yeah.
Because we can be in force and try when there's nothing external, versus the strength is like, there really is this outer wall of the seed and I have to break through it to like come above the soil if I'm the plant. Yeah. So if I'm doing something and I find I'm resentful, making universal statements about the nature of the world, like everything is this way or nothing ever works out this way, that's when I know I'm in resistance and force of my own creation.
You had a pretty big epiphany around assumptions, and that's why we got into these assumptions on how we create change. Yeah. And I feel like this is completely tied to it.
Yeah.
Like the way we deal with the struggles and so on. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So I was in a conversation and I posited that, we can like be on the path, we can have good intentions, but then we like compromise too much and we end up in this mode where we feel like the ends justify the means and we become the very thing we were trying to solve as the problem. The person I was talking to said, yes, and the perfect is the enemy of progress. And I was like, I also hear that. That's also true. And I sat with it and I was like, how can both these things be true? That on the one hand, it's I don't think ever a good idea to just go, is this for a good cause so we can get there by any means, right? We're raising money for the charity, so it's okay if we, did some credit card fraud, right? Like, okay, that doesn't seem right to me. And then on the other hand, the perfect waiting until like, but I won't do it. So going back to that food example, I was talking about eating Cheetos, definitely not my ideal, but there are many times in the supermarket where it's like, this is what's available and I'm going to get kind of the, I'm going to do the best I can in the setting. And I'm not going to not cook dinner just because I couldn't get the 100% grass-fed, whatever, it's like, the perfect can be the enemy of progress. So I sat and I was like, how can both these things be true? And what became clear is that in order for it to be, I think, in order for it to be progress, as opposed to the kind of compromise that compromises our values and erodes our mission, it has to come from a place of, I want the best outcome for everybody involved. So, like, if you and I disagree on something and we make a compromise, we're doing it from a place of like, well, I want what's good for you and you want what's good for me and we want what's good for us jointly. So it's like, okay, what are you seeing that I'm not seeing, or what, talk me through that more, and let's meet someplace based on the energy of we want to co-create. And that's an entirely different energy from, this, we hear these examples in politics all the time. It's like the person who's like, well, I've got this great, bill that will help people in this way. And the other people are like, great, but we won't vote for it unless you sign our bill to, cut down all the forests. And you're like, that doesn't sound good, but okay, it's the ends justifying the means, because this bill, would feed all the hungry children, let's say, right? So you're like, oh, okay, I'll cut down all the forests so it can be. That is a corrosive kind of compromise that's based on a scarcity model that's like, I need what I need. Okay, so I guess I'll give you a little bit of what you need, as opposed to a co-creative model. And so that led me to thinking, if we're talking about making progress, the conversation really has to be in the realm of, what are our intentions? Is it to get one over on the other person so that we can like, okay, I'll give you that, and then you're going to give me my thing? Or is it, I want to hear more about your point of view and understand it, and then maybe there's something that we can co-create?
I feel part of what I'm hearing is that change can't be transactional.
Oh, I mean, I would say net positive change isn't going to be transactional. Yeah. I mean, certainly you can change things and they might even seem like they're good in the short term, but like for it to be what we would call progress, it's not going to be transactional.
Yeah. I feel like part of change is actually us being able to understand each other and find what are the common values. Like you were talking about intentions. What are the common intentions? What are the common values? And how we can find a way where these things are met, instead of just talking about the nitty-gritty details on a bill, for example.
Yeah. And that's, I think, where assumptions come in, because I think the general assumption we make is that it's the actions that are the most important, right? Yeah. Like counting the number of children we fed. You're like, okay, that's the measure of whether we're making progress. And I think we see again and again that when we have the same framework, the same intention, and just replace new content, we keep recreating the same problems, right? We keep recreating the same problems. So I like the funny, lighthearted example I shared with you, right, is that for so long, women have been, sexually objectified. And I've been just watching like a lot of terrible Netflix Christmas movies, right? So Netflix, like, we know what you like, lady. We'll keep recommending those. And it keeps recommending one to me I can't bring myself to watch. It's called Hot Frosty. And it's like a woman who finds a snowman and he comes to life and, is like a hot, sexy guy. And I was looking at that and I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's men being sexually objectified. And so rather than make progress as a culture and go, it's not serving us to sexually objectify anybody, we just do what we call turning the tables, right? And we're like, well, now things are fair. Women were the sexual objects and now men will be the sexual objects and now it's fair, right? I think that's a very clear, tangible way to see just changing the content is not progress. It's not progress that now we're, ogling the man. And because it's not in a respectful way. It's I got nothing against people being sexy, right? But it's not in a like ooh, honoring way. It's in a very base, I'm reducing you to an object kind of way. And if we right, like we can't just switch out who is the person in power and who is the disempowered person and say we've changed the paradigm, but we do it all the time.
And actually, that's a very like primitive way of dealing with things, because if you think, where does it start, is that eye for an eye kind
Yeah.
of
Yes.
thing. Like, if you're doing this to me, then I just do the same thing for you, and now it's okay. But what happens is the other person will want revenge again. It's not
Yeah.
just like, okay, now we're even.
It's
You just escalate things.
it's a very early kind of stage in human development. I would say this is exactly what happens on playgrounds. This is what children do. And we make the logical disconnection about the other person will then want revenge because at that stage of development, we haven't yet really gotten that other people are whole and complete autonomous human beings. We think we're very solipsistic. We're like, it's me. I'm having this experience, and there are these other, objects in the way, and I want to get my way with
Everyone else
them.
is an object.
Yeah. Now, the fact that happens with kids is like, okay, yeah, we have to, I think we can, we can think of in many ways our spiritual evolution as a mirror or a parallel to our human, evolution, not just as a species, but uh, as a like as individuals, right? So Jung talks about this, right? That it's like our own journey becoming an adult human kind of mirrors the whole evolution of humans, and I think also from a spiritual point of view. And so that totally cool. The problem is if you look at the way international policy is done, it's the same thing. It's like, well, though that country did something to offend us, so we're going to come in and like strong arm them. We're going to retaliate, and then like have no sense that they would then want to retaliate back. You're like, no, because we're the hero of this story. So
now
you
the
should
movie ends and everything's okay, and
Yeah.
nobody will ever do it again.
You should just be happy that you got vanquished because at least you got to be in the show. And that's, coming back to this question you posed about do we all want to be happy? Then things start getting really messy because I think we take situations that are truly just about dominance. Like when I look at international policy, I just see a lot of dominance mostly.
Do you want to be happy or do you want to win?
I want to have power over because I'm worried there aren't enough resources. And so I want to make sure I get mine. And things get messy when we take those urges of dominance and we dress them up as morality. And then on top of that, we say, hey, the point of life isn't to be happy. The point of life is to contribute and have meaning, right? So then like the core initiation is just, I want to have power. But then the way I spin it and sell it to everybody else that I need to have on board is, hey, you're part of a bigger cause, right? Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, which Kennedy may have meant in a genuine way. He was on the verge of dismantling some really sinister power structures, right? When he coincidentally was assassinated. he was making some big trouble for, all the alphabet organizations, call them. So I don't mean to call him out as, the most disingenuous politician we've ever had. It just so happens, right, that people know that speech. But if we conflate service and dominance, that's a problem. And then we convince people it's not about being happy and it should be a struggle. And, martyrdom is great. We're we're really supporting the most basic, as you called it, primitive paradigm of power over. And it's
Yeah.
dressed up as progress because we are, I'm so progressive. I'm sacrificing my own happiness for this larger cause. And you're like, hey, guess what? That larger cause is just that this guy is in total scarcity mindset and, is like buying, or so many American politicians are just like, starting in the 80s and 90s, just buying up massive amounts of land in Central and or mostly in Central America because there's water there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that says so much. You don't believe in we're going to make peace. You don't believe in we're going to find a better way and solve these problems. You're literally just buying up all the natural resources you can because that in your
Yes.
mind, it's just a game of hungry hippos.
Hungry hippos.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned the real change needed to come through a shift in energy. And I was really interested in that, even because, well, first of all, I was with the whole thing of power and control versus actually focusing on the intention, the values, and so on, and what we actually want to change, and not just flipping the table over. One thing that came to mind was that, okay, just flipping the table, of course, doesn't work. But how do we elevate the conversation to the point where we can talk about like a shift in the way we approach these things, and a shift in energy, and a shift in the way we relate to each other, instead of just turning one thing into the exact opposite and keeping the same violence and power and struggle and
Dr. Seuss points it out beautifully in this whole thing about like, well, we have stars on our bellies, and so we're the best. And we don't have stars on our bellies, so we're the best, right? And it's a children's story, but it's like a really astute commentary on this turning the tables. I think we have to be genuine with one another. I think we have to admit our motivations. And I believe all change really starts within. I can't think of an example of like spiritual or emotional progress that came from a top-down force paradigm, like a law, like you will now love your neighbor as yourself, right? That, interesting, right? Like the Old Testament gives us commandments, and the New Testament is more like, hey, dude, this is the way it is. Like this is where it's at. Let me tell you some stories to illustrate, what are the ways you want to be acting. And I'm just not familiar with any other texts enough to like make a comparison about the older stuff versus the next level of it. But if we can't be genuine with ourselves, if we can't be genuine with the people in our close circles, our families, our friends, how can we have any expectation that we will cultivate leaders who are genuine with one another when they disagree, and then zooming out even more, leaders of different nation states? Right. I think we're looking at a fundamental change required to what human interaction looks like. And this is the place where I think somebody would say like, oh, wow, Megan, what a pipe dream. Have fun in your ivory tower of, this is the way the world should be, and it would be
Do you
that
still
would,
believe in Santa as well?
yeah, that would be the place where somebody's like, oh, that, la-di-da, but don't let the perfect be the enemy of progress. And I was like, it doesn't need to be perfect, but it requires a shift in what we think it means to have interactions with one another. And people are so fond of quoting Einstein saying, you can't solve the problem with the same thinking that created the problem. And I would say thinking there is synonymous with energy. You
Yeah.
can't solve the problem from the same energy that created it. So I don't know on a practical level how we do it, how long it takes, but I feel very clear that the only true progress would be the upliftment and evolution of us each individually as humans.
We know that power and control is the norm right now. So if this is the energy that created the problem, of
Yeah.
course, that's not a way to solve it. Violence, power, control is not a way to solve it. Maybe just flipping it doesn't solve either. But one thing that came to mind as you were talking about being genuine is something that Brené Brown talks all the time about: vulnerability.
Yeah.
Like, all power control comes from that necessity of protecting ourselves from the other. That separation, which is an illusion, as we know, most people live in total separation. But even us knowing that the separation is an illusion, it doesn't prevent us of getting into that protection mode. A lot of the times, like, fear puts us in that separation mode. Anytime that we feel scared, or we feel like anything that is valuable for us is challenged, we can get into that separation of us versus them, or like, I need to have boundaries and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that boundaries are bad. Sometimes they're necessary in the 3D world that we live.
Yeah. But what's the
But
energy of the boundary?
exactly.
Is it a sacred, like, no? I mean, or is it like yeah.
You don't get into this space.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody told me one time that, like, she had an interaction in the store with a person who was, like, just incredibly mean, and, like, came up to her and said something awful, awful, awful. And then she encountered the person again in the parking lot, and she was driving around behind her going, light and love, light and love, light and love. And I was like, oh God, that's not how light and love works. So it was like this, I mean, it's just self-aware of it, but it was like this beautiful moment of both those energies at the same time, right? On the one hand, like, I want to defend myself. Like, you came into my space and you tore me apart, and, like, that's not okay. And I want to close the sympathetic nervous system loop and defend myself. On the other hand, I know that I should be in light and love.
Sometimes the enlightened thing to do is just say fuck off.
Yeah. I was writing a piece. Sometimes what happens to me is I just, like, hear the opening lines of the story in my head. And so I kept hearing them and kept hearing them. So the other morning I sat and I started writing it. I had no idea where it was going. It's a true story of something that happened, but I didn't know what the shape of the story was. Like, what's the point? What's the climactic moment? Like, what is the thing I learned here? And when I started writing, there was a person in it who was the villain. It was like, and I started writing it, and then I kind of got as far as I could get, and I was like, okay, I still don't know what the story is about, and I'll come back to it later. So I came back to it later, and I got this insight about why was that person, like, it was about, in the moment, I felt like, hey, you messed up and you never apologized to me. Like and I am like, "Rah, rah, rah, rah," so you're the bad guy. And then I was like, just kind of in that liminal space, not doing it with intention, but like, why was that the dynamic? And then I saw this broader picture and I saw like, oh, your family growing up was like this. And this was the role you were put in. And this was the baggage you were getting. And so in that moment, what was going through your head based on like your trauma born survival techniques? And it ended up being a story with no person as a villain. It ended up being a story with where the conflict is that the what trauma teaches us about survival techniques are often the shittiest survival techniques. Like they often endanger us more than they protect us. Like in a very literal way, because it's about driving and car accidents and things like that. So I was really, I don't know, I was just really jazzed by that. And I bring it up because when we are willing to step into that, storytelling, whether it's, writing or, song creation or even visualization and meditation, when we're willing to revisit stories, it's possible for there not to have been a person who's the villain. The conflict could just be like, oh, this is me coming up against my habit or pattern, or wow, this is what it looks like when we let trauma drive. And that is an opening. So, I mean, I guess that is something I think we can do, like become storytellers, become the bards of our own life, revisiting and reshaping and resignifying, as you say. I love that term.
Yeah. And becoming more aware of what's driving us.
Yeah.
Because the root of all conflict is the fact that, and this comes from this whole resignification as well, the root of all conflict is the fact that what we can't accept in us, we tend to project onto others, and then we create the enemies that you just mentioned. The moment where you started looking at this and seeing the whole perspective and what happened to this other person and so on, and allowed yourself to make this person a human being who had bad experiences as well, and not just the enemy that you need to fight, you were able to change the energy, as you were saying, and see things differently. Which, if you were telling a story, but if you were in a conversation to create some change or to make some form of agreement with this person, you would be able to bring the energy and bring the conversation to a level where you can actually see each other as two people trying to solve something instead of two people trying to be right and fight each other.
Yes. And that's what I think we lose sight of. And that maybe that's a very simple energy shift when we're talking in practical terms about there are a lot of things we need to solve. And certainly we don't want to sit and wait around and say, we'll just wait till human beings evolve more spiritually, and then we'll solve the problem of not having enough clean water or, having kids not having food, right?
I agree with you. We need to start with ourselves. And this is part of this, because we started the conversation talking about bigger politics and so on. Yeah. Part of what I see as a problem in power and control, in conflict, at least I see in my life, and I want to bring this out when we escalate, when we talk about things in a bigger scale like politics and so on, is that when you have two people trying to solve something, is a lot different than when you have a group mentality where there's public watching, and it's not, it turns into more of a performance and kind of like entertainment kind of thing, where two politics are trying to please their voters as well, and to show them that they are on their side, and therefore they need to keep the enemy alive and keep the narrative instead of actually creating change. So I feel like even removing the actual conversation from the public eye and having this in more private, and then bringing the solutions afterwards instead of showing the conflict to
Yeah.
everyone
Yeah. So you
would
don't have the
make
posturing.
yes.
Yeah. And you often hear that. I mean, you often say, like, oh, they had a closed door session and all of a sudden they came out and they were like, okay, we've come to an agreement. And that sounds super helpful. I think also it doesn't serve us, and it's really harmful that I think we got this attitude where we said, yeah, but these issues are so important that we don't need to abide by the same rules. Because if a company, if a business were being run the way our, governments are being run, we say, like, that's horrible. You can't treat employees that way. You can't, just be that mean. It's like we have rules in place in every other segment, or expectations, but in some cases it's laws, right? It's like employees' rights, where, if your boss is abusive to you, you get to say, no, that's not okay, and have the situation remedied. And then somehow we said, but all the rules are different for politics. And I think you've hit on an important part of it, which is that it is the show. And it's actually pretty boring I feel like if there were TV footage of a mediation session. So, sometimes, people are going through a divorce or business dissolution. And instead of hiring lawyers to argue and fight, they hire a mediator whose job is to find the common ground and to focus on, like, what is it that you want out of this? And maybe that's the question that's missing, right? So you talked about, what are we trying to solve? And we're not holding leaders accountable to that question. What are you trying to solve? Right? Because that would just cut out so much of the nonsense. They're going on and on and on. You'd be like, okay, just stop. What's the problem here you're trying to solve? And what are you bringing to that solution? And tell me how your idea contributes to that solution in a calm, rational, logical way.
How will this make everybody's lives better?
Yes.
Or even just a group of people lives better, or I don't know, something progress in a way that will be good for the future generations. I don't know.
There's a writing teacher I really adore. Her business is called Brave Writer. And she helps parents teach their kids how to write without the trauma. And she also has books on critical thinking and, like, how to develop that skill in your kids, because it's something we do need to learn. And she has this really amazing, like, I think very ballsy strategy, where if you're in conversation with somebody and they're just, adamant, it's got to be this way, and this is the only way, and anybody who thinks this isn't the way is like a horrible monster, because this is clearly the only way. And she says, like, a great response to them when they're in that mode is, okay, I hear you. Tell me how what you're proposing is going to make life better for these people over here. And you pick the group of people that they have already just dismissed and demonized and dehumanized. So it's what you're saying, right? It's like, oh, okay, I hear where you're coming from. Tell me how that's going to make it. And then it just brings up, it puts a spotlight on the energy of the conversation.
Mm.
And it shows that energy there isn't actually, I want to solve this problem. It's that I think those people deserve to be punished. or I think those people don't deserve to be part of the solution, like they don't count for whatever reason. I'm like, that is so brave. That is just so beautiful and courageous.
Yes.
And it's what you were just saying.
It is definitely a shift. Like I wouldn't even say it is in energy as well, but it's like flipping the mirror. Like,
Yeah.
look at what you're bringing to the table.
Yeah. And that is so important too, because there are a lot of things that in the heat of the moment we may get swept along with, and we say like, yeah, that group or that person, they shouldn't have, it's great that they are, banned from being on YouTube. Like they should. And if you would just say like, well, would you want that to be the case in general? Do you think that would be a good policy for everyone? Or is it just for that guy you don't like?
Yes.
Right? It shows.
How would you feel if that would be the policy for your kids?
Yeah. Or for you, or for the person you do think has ideas worth listening to. Yeah. So and that, I mean, we were talking about Old Testament and New Testament earlier, right? But that's how like we shift from eye for an eye to the golden rule, right? Like treat others how you would want to be treated. That energy carries the entire. I think it's usually said in this like kind of trite banal way where we don't take it seriously. Oh, treat others how you want to be treated. Like it becomes transactional, right? It's like, okay, fine. Oh, here, I'll give you a cookie because I want you to give me a cookie. Versus seeing the other as self.
Yes.
Seeing that connection you were talking about. It's a tricky one. It's not something that is nurtured in, I mean, our society is transactional, and that really seeps deeply into us. But an insight I'm having is that, a first step can be just naming the energy that's at play, and not sitting by and letting that energy masquerade as progress, as some kind of high morality, and just like, oh, that's actually the energy of revenge or hate or punishment.
And even a next level with that would be like pointing out the energy, yes, but finding a way to point out the energy without making the person that's bringing it the enemy.
Yes.
Because that kind of thing can actually create more disagreement.
Absolutely. And then that's that same paradigm of like, well, no, I'm right because you're bringing the energy of revenge to this. And you're like, okay, but you just brought the energy of like self-righteous bullshit, So
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think maybe it's just in part like internally, like, oh, let me just identify that. I don't have to say anything out loud, but let me just identify it. Oh, okay, that's the energy. And then maybe I can soften around it. Like we were talking about with vulnerability, and like I was sharing with writing this story, if I can recognize, oh, you're in a defensive mode or a defensive energy, can I soften so that you feel like it's okay to take a breath?
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm tired of being treated like the goofy spiritual weirdo for saying it's not just going to work to take that person's eye. I feel like we've tried this way for thousands of years and it has never worked. When do we get to try something different?
When we understand that it's just not like that. It doesn't create. There's no ending to the movie.
Yeah. And that, I mean, even that feeling that I have of like, no, your way is stupid and it's my way. I'm like, oh crap, that's me stuck in that old paradigm myself. So um it's just more yoga. I mean, I guess that's always the answer.
Yoga means union, right? So yeah, if we're trying to get out of this illusion of separation and come back to unity,
Yeah.
yeah,
And what I'm doing, my part, like my insight homework is to write more of my stories, because the more I revisit things, the more I have capacity to see the only villain was the energy.
yeah. I love that you brought that up because I've been uh working with seeing the shadows as well, because I feel like um I am aware of a big part of what runs in my subconscious and my shadows and so on. But when I think of that the shadow is actually the thing that we can't see in ourselves, the things that I'm already aware, even though they might seem like shadows for others, they're not shadows for me anymore. So I do have some that are not clear and that I'm probably not aware of, and that are pointed out every time that someone triggers me, or that I see something in someone that I can't recognize in myself. And those are the shadows. And so one thing that came just a while ago was that the shadows can sometimes be actually something good that we can see in ourselves.
That's really helpful.
Yeah,
That's a big insight for me in this conversation, that the shadows are the things we can't see,
yeah.
whatever value we assign to
Our
them.
blind spot.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my thing is like recognizing more of this in my own life so that I can work on myself and remove more and more this illusion of separation myself, instead of just pointing things that are wrong everywhere else.
Beautiful. And I mean, that seems like progress, right? Because one of the things that we've tried as human beings for ages is to find problems externally.
Yeah.
I'll solve this and I'll look at it and I'll solve this. And we had a whole conversation about like all the many reasons why it feels easier to like focus on a challenge or a problem or what's going on for somebody else than for ourselves.
Yeah.
So shifting the paradigm, changing the energy here could be, I think, the way to solve the problems of the world is to emerge as a new version of me.
Yeah.
I'm going to solve me.
I'm gonna solve me.
Not in the sense of I'm broken, but as you're saying, all the shadows, the things.
Yeah, we are the biggest mystery and the biggest puzzle that we have in our hands. So there's a lot to be. So like it's the same thing as like, why are we exploring the cosmos if we haven't solved what's inside of the ocean yet? Like
for that very reason. For that very reason, right?
Ocean.
Yeah, like, oh, this is too hard. Let's move somewhere else. It's like the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. You know, this place is dirty. Everybody move down one place.
Yeah.
And nobody's washing the dishes.
Or because what have they found in the ocean?
Oh, you think it's a distraction technique? It's like, don't, but you really need to look in the ocean. Let's go look at the moon. That's intriguing. Oh, I think that's got to be part of the truth, at least, because there's so many mysteries. So many mysteries. Fabulous. All right. So my big insight, or my big insight is the shadow is just what we can't see. By definition, it's what we can't see. So there's always more of it.
Yeah. And shifting the energy starts with us recognizing what needs to change in us. Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody asked me, like, what rule would I want to follow in my life? Because I was like, I keep following the rules that I think are in place, and I see other people not following the rules, and I'm like, oh, that you're doing what I want, and I'm over here following the. And so she asked this very wise question, like, what's the rule you would want to follow? And of course, all the
Mhm.
first things that came up were rules for other people. There were
Mm.
rules about how other people need to act for me to be happy. And I was like, well, those aren't options.
No.
And so the rule I came up with is that I act from love. That's the rule I want to follow.
Seems like a rule that we can, follow.
Regardless of what anybody else is following as a rule.
Yeah.
I want my
I love
rule to
that.
be act from love, not a fear of being disconnected.
Yeah. I heard a while ago that after, and I'm gonna get into the whole thing in the Bible again, but like when Judas betrayed Jesus, Jesus continued treating Judas as a friend. It was Judas that felt bad for what he'd done, and anyway, he took his life and so on. But if someone does something bad to you, you don't have to change.
Yeah.
It was the other person that did something wrong.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't allow something that someone did for us to break us.
But I think that's where the yoga comes in, right? Because it's building that energetic stability and that like prana and aura to feel I am safe and complete and whole in and of myself. And I'm not broken because I was hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's my homework. More yoga.
Yeah, more yoga. More
insight
security in ourselves.
Yeah, more yoga and more storytelling. That's
We're whole and complete.
Yeah. Well, for those of you joining into the conversation, we'd love to hear what was your big insight and takeaway, and what's your insight action that you would like to implement when it comes to shifting the energy, to shift the paradigms, to create progress.
And what would be your one rule?
Oh, yeah.
That's a good
Can't
one.
wait to hear.
Yeah.
All right.
So
Catch you
until
next time.
Take care.
Bye.